Okay, so welcome everybody to week 6 of the Foundation in Online Art Therapy. This week, we are going to be doing virtual open studios, which is something I absolutely love. I know I probably say this every week for every topic, but I really do love virtual open studios because it's really a way for people to get a taste and a flavor. And I feel like it's a really dynamic space where you're never quite sure what's going to happen. And some people don't like to work with that edge. I really do like to work with that edge of just having fresh energy and new people coming in. But what I thought we would do to start is just have a check-in of what your inner weather is today. So how are you feeling inside? If you can imagine that you are a landscape and there is some weather that's happening inside your being, what is that and how are you doing in your life? So I can go first, and I'll just say, as I was saying, outside is quite rainy today, but I'm feeling kind of the landscape I'm seeing is like in England, we have a lot of cliffs that go onto the sea, and I can kind of imagine that there's some kind of clouds here, but I can also see that the sun is coming, and it's yeah, that kind of feeling of knowing that the rays are going to be on my face in the next half an hour or something when the weather rolls in. So that's how I'm doing today. I had a lot of clients this morning and prep and things like that, and I'm excited to be here. And the reason I bought this is because this is one of the ways that I love to check in, especially with virtual open studios, is this place of allowing people to share something of themselves, to get into like this metaphoric way of thinking, and to start to open to the group, right? And it's very different when we do a virtual open studio because it's standalone. It could be the only time that we ever see someone. We don't have an intake form. It is literally who comes is going to be there, and you don't really know what is going to occur. So today I'm going to be talking about lots of different pieces, including structure, but also how to manage when a lot of emotions do start to come up. And I'm actually going to do a live demo of how to act as a container. And so I'm hoping that one of you is going to be willing to act out as a client today and let me model that for all of you as well. But what I wanted to do, does anybody have any questions from the lecture this week so far? Yes, Sarah, and then Denise.
I was wondering, with your tracking lists, would you keep that on hand for the entire length of the studio, or for 6 months, or?
Yeah, good question. I would just have it as a one-off. And so I wouldn't use people's full names because obviously if I do, then I'm going to need to file it for 7 years. So I'm going to just use maybe people's initials or something that doesn't allow people to be identified. And then I'll just keep it for that session. Unless I'm seeing a pattern of people emerging, and then I might want to be tracking that in my own way as well, because I've definitely had virtual open studios happen where the same group of maybe four or five core people have come back week after week. And I've had new people joining, but then I've also had to transition it into more of a closed group because it just felt like the level of trust was building and it was like more and more stuff was opening. So yes, it's a great question. Yeah. Denise?
Just something totally different. I was thinking about this question just before the session today. I was thinking about clinical supervision and how it fits in when running these type of groups. Of course, they're not necessarily kind of clinical, they're more maybe non-clinical, but yeah, just wondering how that works and how easy is it to find clinical support for supervision when we run groups like that in quite a modern way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fairly easy, but I don't know if that's because the circles that I run in virtual open studios are really common. I teach at Kootenay Art Therapy and also Toronto Art Therapy Institute. So I don't know what it's like in the UK, but at least for us, especially during the pandemic, there has been so many virtual open studios that have sprung up. And it's been a really powerful way for people to continue seeing each other. So a lot of supervisors do have that in their wheelhouse now of being able to. And yes, it isn't clinical. And some clinical issues can come up, right? Because it's this place where we don't know the background of people that are coming. And so I've had people disclose that they're on a cancer journey and they've just got a diagnosis in an open studio, which you think that shouldn't happen. And yet it does. And it's like, how do we build these structures to support this? Because maybe this is the only way somebody can access therapy. So yes and no. It's like, yes, it's not considered clinical, and it often can be as well, just because we are unable to filter who comes. Although I'm going to talk about how we can frame it to encourage the kind of people to self-identify if it's going to be suitable and a match for them today as well. Yeah, which might help. Yes, Mary.
I was interested in the length of time for the art making. I think it was 25 minutes. About. So one thing that comes to mind is that that's not a whole lot of time, but the other thing that comes to mind is it kind of keeps it from going too deep.
Exactly. And also you're going to vary it. So let's say you have a studio and 2 people turn up, or you could have, let's say you've capped it at 12 and you have 12. So that's going to be very different. And I'm actually, the next portion, I'm going to actually talk about the structure and how we can do it. But it's like we're going to be flexing ourselves and the shape of us depending on how many people you have, how long you want for processing, already things that you might see arising in the group, like when you are witnessing art making happening, because you can also, but what I'm doing in the beginning is very much seeing how many numbers there are and working out the time base, because I want to give people around 5 minutes each. Sometimes it's less. So, or more, right? If I've got 2 participants and it's a 2-hour virtual open studio, I'm going to be like, okay, we have a lot of time today. Or I might say, okay, we're actually going to take a lot longer for art making today. So I'm going to always be like, compressing and expanding. Yeah. Anyone else have any questions before I go into the beginning stages of doing it? Okay, great. Then I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So, and before I launch into this, I'm actually going to say that like I ran a in-person studio for a year before I did virtual open studios. And it was because of the pandemic. Katie said to me, hey, could you run some? And I was like, sure, it's going to be exactly the same. And it wasn't at all. It was actually completely different. In person, I had anywhere from 3 to 30 people come over a 3-hour session. I would have a project each week. People would come and go. And on the virtual, it felt to me like it needed to be a lot more structured. So we do end up having a beginning, a middle, and an end, which is very different from when people can just drop in. And this is not the only way to run a virtual open studio. You obviously could have that model where it is people dropping in when they want to over a longer period of time. Or I've even known some people to do virtual open studios over Instagram, which I wouldn't recommend because you don't know how it's impacting the people, but that's not to say people aren't doing it. And it isn't kind of a different way to work as long as you are modeling art as therapy. But as we know, things can come up at any time from the images. So we really want to be careful with creating these containers and how we do it. So, oh, yes, go ahead.
Can you use Instagram? Didn't you say that some of the platforms are only to be used?
Yeah.
Like
So you could,
Live is not
how
one.
people have done it is run it as a live and not show any of the participants. So on Instagram, it would just like say I was doing a live now, it would just be me. And so I might be reading people's comments out, but I might do it in a way that's much more confidential. So there is kind of a way around it, but I would really recommend doing it on a much more in-person via Zoom, via platforms that are PIPDIA and PIPA compliant. Yeah, but that's not to say that you couldn't, but you have to really be aware of how that's going to impact your clients and the container around, right? Because we always want to create safety. That's kind of our number one.